November 22, 1987. Someone broke into American television and showed millions of people something that still makes no sense. The FBI, Secret Service, and FCC launched one of the biggest investigations in broadcast history, but the hijacker was never caught, never identified, and never explained why they did it. How did someone pull off the perfect crime on live TV and then disappear like they never existed? Chicago, Illinois. It was a cold Sunday night, and over 1 million people were watching television in their living rooms. They had no idea that in exactly 3 hours, someone was going to take control of their screens and show them something impossible. The person who did it needed expensive equipment, deep technical knowledge, and perfect timing. They also needed something else. They needed to know exactly when to stop and never speak about it again. That last part might be the strangest piece of all. At 9:14 in the evening, sports fans across Chicago were watching WGN, Channel 9. The Chicago Bears had just beaten the Detroit Lions, and people wanted to see the highlights. Dan Roan, the sports announcer, was talking about the game. The picture was clear. The sound was normal. Everything felt safe and ordinary, the way television always felt. Then the screen went black. For 1 second, there was nothing. Then static filled every television tuned to Channel 9. White and gray dots danced across the screen. No sound, just the crackling buzz of a dead signal. People leaned forward in their chairs. They hit their TV sets with their palms. They thought something was wrong with their antenna. They were right that something was wrong, but it had nothing to do with their antenna. The static cleared. What appeared next made no sense. A person wearing a Max Headroom mask stared out from the screen. Max Headroom was a popular character from television, a computer-generated talking head that appeared in commercials and on a science fiction show. Everyone in America knew what Max Headroom looked like. But this was different. This Max Headroom was wrong. The mask looked cheap and twisted. Behind the figure, a piece of metal spun slowly, creating a dizzy, rotating background. The person wearing the mask swayed back and forth like they were drunk or trying to make people feel sick. There was no sound, just the silent image of this masked figure moving in front of spinning metal. It lasted 25 seconds. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished. Dan Roan was back on the screen, looking confused. He made a joke about getting rid of rocket scientists, but you could hear the uncertainty in his voice. He had no idea what had just happened. Nobody did. Engineers at WGN went into emergency mode. They checked every piece of equipment. They searched for technical failures. They found nothing wrong. Their signal had been overpowered by someone else. Someone had broadcast a stronger signal on the same frequency and taken control of the channel. This was not supposed to be possible. WGN was a major television station in the third largest city in America. Their equipment was professional and expensive. Their signal was strong, yet someone had pushed them off the air like it was easy. The engineers felt a cold fear growing in their chests. If this could happen once, it could happen again. 2 hours and 1 minute later, it did happen again. At 11:15 that night, people watching WWTTW Channel 11 were in the middle of a Doctor Who episode. The show was called Horror of Fang Rock, and it was about a mysterious force attacking a lighthouse. Viewers were focused on the story when their screens suddenly cut to black. Then the same masked figure appeared. But this time was different. This time, there was sound. A distorted, buzzing voice came through television speakers across Chicago. The voice was hard to understand, twisted and electronic. The person in the max headroom mask started talking, but nothing they said made any sense. The figure rocked back and forth faster now. The spinning metal background made the whole image feel wrong, like a nightmare. The voice hummed a theme song from an old cartoon called Clutch Cargo. Then it started mocking Chuck Swirsky, a sports announcer from WGN. The words were mean but childish. The voice called him a liberal and made fun of his looks. Then it switched topics completely, talking about nerds, candy, and Coca-Cola. There was no pattern, no clear message, just random, angry rambling. The figure held up a Pepsi can and quoted an old Coca-Cola commercial. Then things got stranger. The camera angle changed. Someone wearing what looked like a French-made glove started hitting the masked figure on the bottom with a fly swatter. The person in the mask moaned and said, "Catch the wave." Then the figure bent over and the hitting continued. This went on for 90 full seconds. Families sat frozen in their living rooms. Parents put their hands over their children's eyes. People felt confused and violated. Television was supposed to be safe. It was controlled. It was regulated. The government made sure that only certain people could broadcast signals. Yet here was proof that all those rules meant nothing. Someone had taken control. Someone had reached right through the screen into living rooms across an entire city. At WTTW, engineers fought desperately to stop the signal. They tried switching frequencies. They tried overpowering the hijacker's broadcast. Nothing worked. The intruder's signal was too strong. For 90 seconds, the engineers were completely helpless. They could only watch and wait until the hijacker decided to stop. When the signal finally cut out, Doctor Who came back on. The show continued like nothing had happened, but everything had changed. Within minutes, phone calls flooded the television stations. The FCC received reports. The FBI was notified. This was a federal crime. Broadcast signal intrusion carried serious penalties. Up to $100,000 in fines, 1 year in prison. The government took this very seriously because the same equipment that could hijack a television station could also hijack emergency broadcasts or military communications. This was not just a prank. This was a threat to national security. The investigation started immediately. Agents needed to understand how this was possible. To hijack WGN, someone needed to know the exact frequency of the station's microwave link between their studio and the transmitter on top of the Sears Tower. To hijack WTTW, they needed to know that station's transmission path to the John Hancock Center. Both stations used different frequencies. Both had different technical setups. The hijacker would need line-of-sight access to the receiving antennas. They would need a powerful transmitter. They would need thousands of dollars worth of equipment. They would need expertise that took years to learn, and they needed to do all of this without being detected before, during, or after the broadcasts. Investigators began building a profile. This was not some teenager with a radio kit. This was someone with deep knowledge of Chicago's broadcast infrastructure, someone who had done research, someone who had planned carefully. The video itself had been pre-recorded on professional equipment. The quality was too good for consumer cameras. Every detail pointed to someone who knew exactly what they were doing. But there was something else that bothered investigators even more. The hijacker had proven they could take control of major television stations, and then they stopped. They did not brag. They did not demand money. They did not leave clues. They simply vanished. The detail that kept investigators awake at night was this. The hijacker's restraint was perfect. 90 seconds on WTTW, then silence forever. No manifesto posted later. No drunken confession years down the road. No equipment found in a dumpster. No suspicious radio signals detected in the days before or after. Whoever did this understood that the real victory was in never being caught. They had the discipline to commit the crime and then disappear completely. That kind of control suggested something far more disturbing than a simple prank. It suggested someone who understood power not as something to show off, but as something to hold silently. And that person was still out there, somewhere in Chicago, watching everyone search for answers they would never find. The morning after the hijacking, federal agents sat in conference rooms trying to understand what had happened. They spread maps of Chicago across tables. They marked the locations of broadcast towers. They drew lines showing possible transmission points. The science was simple, but the execution was terrifying. Someone had found the weak point in television security and exploited it perfectly. Now investigators needed to figure out who had the knowledge, the equipment, and the access to pull this off. The technical requirements were staggering. A broadcast transmitter, powerful enough to override a professional television station, cost between $15,000 and $20,000 in 1987. That was more than many people made in an entire year. The equipment was not something you could buy at a regular store. It required special orders from suppliers who kept records. Every purchase left a trail. Yet, somehow, no trail existed. Investigators contacted equipment manufacturers across the country. They requested sales records for high-powered transmitters. They found nothing suspicious. Either the hijacker had bought the equipment years earlier, or they had access to it through other means. The second option was more frightening. It meant the person might work in broadcasting already. The FCC brought in their top engineers to analyze the signal. They measured the strength and calculated the approximate location where the transmission originated. The hijacker needed to be high up with a clear line of sight to the Sears Tower for the WGN intrusion and to the John Hancock Center for the WTTW hijacking. Engineers drew circles on maps showing possible locations. The circles covered dozens of buildings, apartment complexes, office towers, even other broadcast facilities. Agents began the slow work of checking each location. They looked for rooftop access. They interviewed building security guards. They asked if anyone had seen unusual equipment or suspicious activity on the night of November 22nd. Everyone said no. No one had seen anything. No one had heard anything. The hijacker had been invisible. Days turned into weeks. The investigation expanded. The FBI brought in behavioral analysts to study the content of the broadcast. What did it mean? Why max headroom? Why mock Chuck Swirsky? Why reference Coca-Cola and Nerds candy? Analysts watched the 90-second video over and over. They made transcripts of every word. They noted every gesture. Some thought the references suggested someone young, maybe in their 20s or 30s. Max headroom was popular with that age group. The humor was crude and silly. But other details suggested someone older and more experienced. The technical execution was too perfect for a young amateur. Witness reports trickled in. People called tip lines saying they recognized the voice. They claimed to know who did it. Every lead was investigated. Every name was checked. None led anywhere. The problem was that the voice had been deliberately distorted. The hijacker had used audio equipment to change how they sounded. Voice recognition was impossible. The video quality made identifying physical features equally impossible. The mask covered the entire head. Gloves covered the hands. The person who spanked the hijacker with the fly swatter was never fully visible, just an arm and a maid costume sleeve. Two people were clearly involved, maybe more behind the camera. This was a coordinated effort. The theory that bothered investigators most was the insider theory. Someone who worked in Chicago broadcasting would have access to equipment. They would understand the technical systems. They might even have keys to buildings with rooftop access. The FBI quietly began background checks on engineers who had recently been fired or disciplined by local stations. They looked for people with grudges. They investigated employees who had the skills and the opportunity. But broadcast engineering was a small community in Chicago. Word spread quickly that people were being investigated. Engineers became defensive and stopped cooperating. The investigation hit a wall. Meanwhile, the public reaction was growing. News coverage of the incident spread across the country. Other cities wondered if their broadcasts were vulnerable. The FCC issued statements saying they were taking the matter very seriously. They announced that catching the hijacker was a top priority. They promised that new security measures would be put in place to prevent future intrusions. But privately, officials were worried. The truth was that broadcast security in 1987 relied on the assumption that most people did not have access to expensive equipment or technical knowledge. That assumption had just been proven wrong. If one person could do this, others could too. The FCC had to show they could catch this hijacker or risk copycat crimes across the nation. Weeks passed with no breakthrough. The trail was cold from the start because there was no trail, no fingerprints, no DNA, no witnesses who saw the actual transmission site. The hijacker had left nothing behind. Investigators began to realize they were dealing with someone who had thought through every detail. The location was chosen carefully, somewhere the hijacker could set up equipment, broadcast, and leave quickly without being noticed. The timing was deliberate. Sunday night when fewer people were working in office buildings. The content was pre-recorded, so there was no live transmission that could be traced. Even the decision to stop after 90 seconds suggested planning. The hijacker knew that the longer they stayed on air, the greater the chance of being caught. A new theory emerged. Maybe this was a test. Maybe the hijacker was proving they could do it before attempting something bigger. Federal agents worried that this might be preparation for a more serious attack. What if someone wanted to hijack emergency broadcast systems during a crisis? What if this was practice for a coordinated attack on multiple stations at once? The FCC increased security at broadcast facilities nationwide. They installed new equipment to detect unauthorized signals. They trained engineers to respond faster to intrusions. But all of this was reactive. They were protecting against the last attack, not the next one. Then something strange happened. Nothing. No second attack came. No demands, no messages. The hijacker had made their point and gone silent. This silence was more unsettling than another intrusion would have been. It meant the hijacker had gotten what they wanted from those 90 seconds. But what did they want? Attention? Proof of concept? Simple chaos? Without a motive, investigators had no way to predict behavior or narrow their search. Engineers at WTTW and WGN implemented new security measures. They encrypted their signals. They changed frequencies. They installed monitoring equipment to detect unauthorized transmissions. Other stations did the same. The entire broadcast industry was forced to admit that their systems were vulnerable. Millions of dollars were spent upgrading security. all because one person with knowledge and equipment had exposed a flaw that should never have existed. By early December, the investigation was stalling. The FBI had interviewed hundreds of people. They had checked thousands of equipment sales records. They had analyzed the video from every possible angle. They had consulted with broadcast experts across the country. Every lead had gone nowhere. The case was not officially closed, but resources were being moved to other priorities. Agents still hoped for a breakthrough. Maybe someone would brag at a bar. Maybe a piece of equipment would turn up. Maybe a conscience would start to bother someone involved. But as weeks turned into months, hope faded. The most disturbing discovery came from analyzing what the hijacker did not do. They did not damage equipment. They did not broadcast anything truly harmful or illegal. They did not threaten anyone directly. In legal terms, this was mischief, not terrorism. But the implications were enormous. If someone could take control of television broadcasts this easily, what else could they control? Phone systems? Computer networks? The incident revealed that society's infrastructure was held together by trust and the assumption that most people lacked the knowledge or motivation to attack it. The max headroom hijacker had proven that assumption wrong. They had shown that one person with the right skills could reach into millions of homes and take control. And then they had shown something even more frightening. They had demonstrated the discipline to stop, to never brag, to never get caught. That kind of control suggested a mind that understood power in a way most people never would. It suggested someone still out there, still watching, still silent after all these months. And that silence was the most terrifying evidence of all. By the spring of 1988, the Max Headroom incident had transformed from an active investigation into an unsolved mystery. The story began appearing in magazines and newspapers across the country, but the tone had shifted. Early coverage treated it as a serious federal crime. Now it was becoming something else. An urban legend. A symbol of how vulnerable modern technology really was. People who had watched it happen started telling the story at parties. The details got exaggerated with each retelling. Some said the broadcast lasted 10 minutes instead of 90 seconds. Others claimed the hijacker had revealed government secrets. None of this was true, but truth mattered less than the feeling the incident created. The feeling that someone had broken the rules and gotten away with it completely. The FCC released public statements trying to calm fears. They emphasized that new security measures were in place. They said that broadcast intrusions were now much harder to execute. They never mentioned that they had no idea who did it or how to prevent someone with equal knowledge from doing it again. The official message was confidence and control. The private reality was frustration and uncertainty. Agents working the case began to suspect they were chasing a ghost. Every promising lead evaporated under investigation. Every suspect had an alibi or lacked the technical knowledge. The case file grew thicker with dead ends. Witnesses who had seen the broadcast started receiving attention they did not want. Talk shows called asking them to describe what they saw. Reporters showed up at their homes. Some witnesses enjoyed the attention at first, but it quickly became uncomfortable. People asked the same questions over and over. Did you recognize the voice? Did you see any identifying details? Could you describe exactly how it made you feel? The questions never led anywhere because there were no answers. The broadcast had been designed to leave no clues. Every choice the hijacker made seemed calculated to prevent identification. The distorted voice, the mask, the gloves, the pre-recorded format. Even the chaotic content seemed designed to confuse rather than communicate anything clear. Media coverage began to split into competing theories. Some journalists focused on the insider theory. They interviewed former broadcast engineers who explained how someone with access and knowledge could execute the hijacking. These stories made these sound like the culprit was probably someone working in Chicago television, someone nursing a grudge, or proving a point to colleagues who had dismissed them. Other coverage went in a different direction. They treated the incident as a mystery that might never be solved, emphasizing the strange content and the perfect disappearance. These stories attracted people who loved unsolved cases, people who wanted to believe that someone could commit the perfect crime. The Chicago broadcasting community became defensive. Engineers and technicians resented the implication that one of their own was responsible. They pointed out that the equipment could have been obtained by anyone with money and determination. They noted that broadcast frequencies were public information. Anyone could learn the technical details with enough research. Blaming insiders was lazy thinking, they said. It ignored the possibility that the hijacker was a complete outsider who had simply done their homework. But investigators could not ignore the insider theory. Too many details suggested intimate knowledge of Chicago broadcast systems, the timing, the frequencies, the locations. All of it pointed to someone who knew the industry from the inside. Then copycat attempts started happening. In other cities, people tried to hijack local broadcasts. Most were caught immediately. Their equipment was crude. Their technical knowledge was shallow. They got arrested within days and faced serious federal charges. These arrests proved something important. Most people who tried broadcast intrusion got caught quickly. The Max Headroom hijacker was different. They had executed the crime with a level of skill and planning that set them apart. Every copycat attempt made the original incident look more impressive and more disturbing. It was like watching amateurs try to recreate a master's work. They could copy the idea, but not the execution. The content of the broadcast itself became the subject of endless analysis. People freeze-framed the video and studied every detail. They transcribed every word of the distorted audio. They created lists of all the references: Max Headroom, Chuck Swirsky, Clutch Cargo, Coca-Cola, Nerds Candy, the Fly Swatter, the Maid Glove. What did it all mean? Some thought the references revealed the hijacker's age and interests. Others believed the randomness was deliberate misdirection. Maybe the hijacker had chosen references that meant nothing to confuse investigators. Maybe every clue was actually a false clue designed to lead nowhere. This level of thinking suggested something chilling. It suggested the hijacker had anticipated the investigation and had planted confusion deliberately. Police reports from that night documented the chaos at both television stations. Engineers at WTTW described feeling helpless as they tried to stop the signal. One report quoted a technician saying the experience felt like being invaded. The word choice was telling. This was not just a technical failure. It felt personal. Someone had reached into their workplace and taken control. Someone had demonstrated that all their expertise and expensive equipment meant nothing against a prepared attacker. The psychological impact on the engineers was lasting. Some left the industry entirely. Others became obsessed with security, spending years developing better protection systems. Court documents from the investigation showed the scope of the federal response. Subpoenas were issued for equipment sales records. Search warrants were executed on suspected locations. The FBI interviewed over 200 people. The Secret Service got involved because broadcast intrusion fell under their jurisdiction of protecting communications infrastructure. The combined resources of multiple federal agencies produced exactly 0 arrests. The case file documented one of the most thorough investigations in FCC history, and it all led nowhere. The hijacker had vanished like smoke. By late 1988, something darker began to emerge in the public conversation. People started to admire the hijacker, not the content of the broadcast, which was juvenile and meaningless, but the execution, the planning, the perfect escape. In a society where everyone felt watched and controlled, someone had proven that the watchers could be beaten. Someone had shown that authority was not as powerful as it pretended to be. This sentiment made law enforcement uncomfortable. The hijacker was becoming a folk hero to a certain type of person. People who felt powerless in their own lives found satisfaction in knowing that someone had beaten the system so completely. Towns across Chicago began to change how they thought about the incident. At first, it was frightening, a violation. Now it was becoming part of local history. A strange moment when reality cracked open for 90 seconds and something unexplainable came through. People started describing where they were when it happened, what they were doing, how it made them feel. The broadcast became a shared experience that defined a moment in time. For people who had been watching, it was proof that life could surprise you, that the normal, safe world could suddenly reveal something strange underneath. The families of suspects who had been investigated and cleared faced lasting consequences. Even though they were innocent, rumors persisted. People whispered that maybe the FBI just could not prove it. Maybe the person was too smart to get caught. These whispers damaged reputations and careers. Some people moved away from Chicago to escape the suspicion. Others stayed and tried to rebuild their lives under a cloud they did not deserve. The hijacking had created victims beyond the television stations. Anyone who fit the profile became suspect. Anyone with broadcast knowledge and an odd sense of humor found themselves explained in police interviews. The most terrifying fact emerged not from evidence, but from absence. The hijacker had committed a federal crime in front of 1 million witnesses and left behind nothing traceable. No DNA because they never touched anything at the broadcast sites. No fingerprints because they wore gloves. No voice identification because of audio distortion. No equipment recovery because they disposed of it perfectly or kept it hidden. No witnesses because they chose their location carefully. No confessions because they never told anyone. This level of operational security was almost unheard of in 1987. It suggested either incredible luck or meticulous planning. Investigators believed it was planning, which meant the hijacker had thought through every possible way they could be caught and had eliminated each vulnerability. That kind of thinking did not belong to an amateur pulling a prank. It belonged to someone who understood how investigations worked and how to stay ahead of them. And that person was still out there somewhere, living a normal life, carrying a secret that would send them to prison if anyone ever learned the truth. The silence had lasted more than a year now. How long could someone keep such a secret? Forever, apparently. And that was the most disturbing discovery of all. The case file for the Max Headroom broadcast intrusion remains open at the FCC, but no one has worked on it actively in decades. The statute of limitations for federal broadcast crimes has long since expired. If the hijacker confessed tomorrow, they could not be prosecuted. They won, completely and permanently. The investigation that involved the FBI, Secret Service, and FCC, that consumed thousands of hours and significant resources, produced exactly 0 results. The hijacker proved that with enough knowledge and planning, Someone could commit a crime in front of 1 million witnesses and face no consequences. That lesson has not been forgotten. Television stations across America changed how they operate because of those 90 seconds. Signals are now encrypted and monitored constantly. The kind of intrusion that happened in 1987 is nearly impossible with modern technology. But this protection came at a cost. Millions of dollars spent upgrading systems, new regulations that made broadcasting more expensive, a loss of the casual trust that had defined the industry for decades. The max headroom hijacker forced the entire country to acknowledge that broadcast security had been an illusion. The infrastructure that brought news and entertainment into every home was fragile. One person with the right tools could break it. The investigators who worked the case have mostly retired or passed away. A few gave interviews over the years, expressing frustration. One former FBI agent said the case haunted him because it was so perfectly executed. He believed the hijacker had to be someone with insider knowledge, but he could never prove it. Another investigator thought it might have been a group of engineering students pulling an elaborate prank. They would be in their 50s or 60s now, carrying the secret into middle age. He wondered if any of them had ever felt guilty or wanted to confess. Apparently not. The silence has been absolute. The witnesses have aged too. People who were children when they saw the broadcast are now in their 40s. Some barely remember it. Others say it marked the first time they realized the world was stranger and less safe than they had believed. Parents who covered their children's eyes that night have told their own children about it, passing the story down like a family legend. The broadcast became a generational marker. If you were in Chicago on November 22, 1987, and you were watching television at the right time, you saw something nobody has been able to explain or replicate. That makes you part of history. Chicago itself has changed beyond recognition. The Sears Tower is now called Willis Tower. Broadcast technology has gone digital. The skyline has new buildings. But people still talk about the incident. Local historians include it in collections of strange Chicago events. True crime enthusiasts debate theories on internet forums. Amateur investigators have spent years trying to identify the hijacker. Some claim to have narrowed it down to a handful of suspects. Others think they have found the smoking gun in old equipment sales records or employment files. None of these theories have ever been verified. They remain speculation built on fragments and guesses. What we still do not know is more significant than what we do know. We do not know the hijacker's identity. We do not know their motive beyond apparent mockery of television and authority. We do not know if they acted alone or with accomplices. We do not know what happened to the equipment they used. We do not know if they ever felt tempted to do it again. We do not know if they are alive or dead. We do not know if they watch the endless online discussions about their crime with amusement or indifference. Every question remains unanswered. Modern technology has made new kinds of crimes possible, but it has also made old crimes harder. Digital footprints track almost everything we do. Cameras watch public spaces constantly. Electronic payments leave records. Communications are monitored. Privacy has eroded to the point where executing a crime like the max headroom hijacking today would be nearly impossible. The hijacker operated in a brief window when technology was sophisticated enough to allow the crime, but not sophisticated enough to prevent it. That window has closed, which makes the 1987 incident feel even more strange, like an artifact from a different world. The internet has kept the story alive in ways that would have been impossible before. Videos of the broadcast have been uploaded and watched millions of times. People enhance the audio trying to understand the distorted words. They analyze the background searching for identifying details. They create documentaries and podcasts examining every angle. The incident has become a permanent part of internet culture, endlessly discussed and mythologized. New generations discover it and become fascinated. The mystery has outlived the technology that made it possible. Some people have claimed over the years to be the hijacker or to know who did it. In the early 2010s, someone posted cryptic messages on internet forums suggesting they were involved. They knew small details that had not been widely reported, but they never provided proof. The posts could have been from the real hijacker or from someone who had researched the case carefully. When pushed for verification, the person disappeared. The posts were analyzed and debated for months. No consensus was reached. The mystery deepened instead of clearing. The incident changed how we think about television and authority. Before November 22, 1987, broadcast media felt permanent and official. What appeared on screen had been approved and controlled. After the hijacking, everyone knew that control was fragile. Someone could break in. Someone could show you something unexpected. This knowledge changed the relationship between viewers and their televisions. A small seed of doubt was planted. That seed has grown over decades as media has fractured into thousands of sources, many unverified and uncontrolled. The Max Headroom hijacker was ahead of their time in demonstrating that official channels could be hijacked and subverted. What happened to the person or people who did this? They went back to their normal lives. They woke up the next morning and went to work or school. They saw news coverage and investigation updates. They watched federal agents search for them. They kept quiet. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Months became years. The temptation to tell someone must have been enormous. Human beings are social creatures. We want to share our triumphs. We want recognition for our achievements. But the hijacker never broke. They understood that the real victory was in the silence. Being caught would have ruined everything. Staying free meant staying quiet forever. Somewhere, possibly still in Chicago, possibly somewhere else, a person knows exactly what equipment they used. They know where they transmitted from. They know who helped them. They know why they chose Max Headroom and why they mocked Chuck Swirsky. They know what the fly swatter meant. They know everything, and they have told no one for 37 years. That kind of discipline is almost superhuman. Most criminals get caught because they talk. They confess to friends. They brag to partners. They leave digital trails trying to relive their moment of glory. The Max Headroom hijacker did none of this. They committed the crime and then disappeared into normal life so completely that decades of investigation found nothing. What does it mean that someone can do this? What does it say about our systems and our assumptions? We build society on the belief that rules will be followed and that rule breakers will be caught. We trust that authority is watching and that justice will be served. The Max Headroom incident is a reminder that these beliefs are sometimes wrong. Someone can break the rules spectacularly and never face consequences. Someone can demonstrate that the watchers are not as powerful as they claim, and then that someone can live out their entire life carrying the secret, watching the rest of us search for answers that will never come. The hijacker taught us that reality has cracks in it. For 90 seconds, something came through one of those cracks. Then it vanished. But the crack is still there. We just cannot see it anymore. The final question is not whether the hijacker will ever be caught. That ship has sailed. The question is what kind of person can pull off something like this and then stay silent for nearly 4 decades. What does that silence feel like? Is it satisfying to know you beat the system so completely, or does the secret become a weight that grows heavier every year? Does the hijacker think about those 90 seconds often, or have they moved on? Do they watch the documentaries and read the forum posts with pride or with regret? We will probably never know. And maybe that is the point. Maybe the hijacker's greatest achievement is not the intrusion itself, but the permanent mystery they created. A question with no answer. A crime with no criminal. A moment in history that will never be fully understood. That might be exactly what they wanted all along.